acted out of caution.
You called cops on a child!
She called in an active threat on a teenage birthday party, Sergeant Elena Kitt muttered, still standing beside the open squad car door. We had no idea we'd roll up on a backyard of off-duty officers. Across the driveway, Loretta Glynn, president of the Red Crest Bluff HOA, stood smugly with a printed clipboard in one hand and a self-satisfied half-smile. Her blue sash with Safety and Standards chair shimmered slightly in the flashing lights. I acted out of caution. We had a lot of unregistered activity. Uniforms, unknown guests, vehicles backed into driveways. That's suspicious by code, Sergeant. I didn't even blink. You know what else pinged suspicious? I held up my phone, screen facing her. That your community access panel logged the emergency override code at 6:41 p.m., the same minute your HOA landline made that 911 call. And guess what? That override key still routes through my fiber switch. Her fake concern twitched into something colder. Calculating. But she didn't speak. Subscribe if you've ever had your peace shattered by people who think their title makes them untouchable. What happens next isn't just about a party. It's about the entire system that let her get away with this, for now. My name's Callan Trask. I calibrate emergency radio systems for 6 municipalities and 2 fire districts. Every signal, from the station dispatch to the drone patrol on your mailbox tower, bounces through hardware I maintain. I know when a misuse pattern starts, and I sure as hell know when someone uses law enforcement channels to push their own personal agenda. Loretta looked away for the first time. But this wasn't about me. This was about Hollis, my daughter. 16 that day, her first birthday without her mother, who was killed in a domestic standoff 2 years ago, wearing that same badge number Hollis had asked the bakery to carve into her cake. The cake we never even cut, the one that still sat in our garage-turned-dance floor, right next to a table of folded officer jackets and untouched root beer cans. She had planned this for 6 months, not a party full of strangers, just the officers she grew up calling aunt and uncle, her mother's precinct, her mother's legacy. And Loretta called it a threat. The minute those lights hit our driveway, Hollis disappeared into the side hallway, hyperventilating. Her therapist warned this could happen, that the wrong kind of surprise could undo months of quiet healing. And all Loretta had to say was, it's protocol. This wasn't protocol. This was performance. Red Crest Bluff was never a normal suburb. It sold security. It sold prestige wrapped in gated silence. And Loretta Glynn made herself the architect of both. She didn't like the sound of laughter past 7 p.m. She didn't like uniforms that weren't part of her security crew. And she especially didn't like that we didn't ask her for permission to honor my wife. She'd been circling since the flyer went up. Sweet 16, honor and memory gathering, quiet hours observed. I even submitted the courtesy form, even though I didn't need to. But she changed the rules 2 weeks ago. A new clause slipped into the bylaws about external law enforcement gatherings requiring board oversight. It passed quietly. No vote, no resident notice. I should have seen it coming. I just didn't think she'd weaponize a police dispatch system. You're going to hear from me again, I told her, stepping toward the cruiser. Not as a father, not even as a contractor. You're going to hear from systems you don't get to control. Sergeant Kitt nodded grimly and holstered her tablet. For what it's worth, every officer here is filing misconduct paperwork. HOA call abuse goes straight to the oversight committee if it's proven malicious. Loretta was already turning away, clicking her pen furiously, fake filing some incident report she knew wouldn't hold. But I wasn't filing anything. I was building something. She had no idea that from the moment her call went through my node, she handed me the keys to her undoing. I spent the rest of that night wiping smudged frosting off our garage floor while Hollis slept upstairs, door shut tight. She hadn't spoken since the squad cars left, not even when Sergeant Kitt came back to apologize in person and promised a written report. Hollis just nodded, eyes empty. 16 years old, first party since her mother's funeral, and the only lights she got were red and blue. The next morning, I opened the HOA bulletin. Digital copy, of course, because Loretta always sent her community digest within 12 hours of any event she deemed disruptive. And there it was, tucked between landscaping reminders and a note about trash can lids. A formal incident notice. Unexpected law enforcement gathering raises resident safety concerns, it read. She called my daughter's birthday party a law enforcement gathering like it was a drug bust. Said it potentially undermined neighborhood harmony and triggered multiple concerns from nearby homes. Then added a bolded line in red. The HOA reminds all residents that gatherings involving external uniforms must be pre-approved through appropriate channels. She didn't just double down, she sanitized the whole thing. And that line, multiple concerns, was a lie. I knew it, because I checked the gate logs. Only one call was made that night. From the HOA line, not from a neighbor, not from someone passing by, from the inside. She hadn't just overstepped. She'd framed it like she had support. At 11 Salas a.m., I took a walk down to the central mailbox structure, conveniently located next to the HOA's monitoring kiosk, a glorified shed with a fingerprint reader and a drone pad mounted on the roof. I stood there pretending to scroll my phone while the gate drone slowly adjusted its direction, just enough to angle toward me. It never used to do that. That model had a 4-point memory system. It could only track manually designated threats or obey retargeted priority zones, which meant someone had recoded its focus within the last 24 hours. That someone was Loretta. I could feel it, that tightening grip she loved to disguise as neighborhood order. She didn't just want to shut down the party, she wanted to brand it, document it, feed it into her concern log and make it part of her growing file on residents who, in her words, disrupted the texture of Redcrest Bluff. She'd done it before. Quietly, selectively. A neighbor who taught martial arts out of his garage got a noise concern alert. Another woman whose adult son stayed with her while recovering from surgery had to remove the wheelchair ramp from the sidewalk-facing side. Loretta made everything sound like a policy tweak, never a personal decision. But I'd been reading between the lines for months. Still, this time was different. This wasn't about noise. This was about targeting uniforms and legacy. I needed to be sure. That night, I accessed the community's open-access web camera archives, not the internal feeds, which I had no legal right to view, but the publicly displayed clips from the entry gate, archived in the name of neighborhood transparency. There were 14 clips in total, every entry from the party. No complaints, no arguments, no excessive speed, just officers waving, smiling, carrying wrapped gifts and soda packs, all time-stamped, all calm. So, why did she say residents were alarmed? I opened up the HOA community Slack, the internal message board. I rarely posted there, but it was where Loretta's inner circle usually operated. Most of the threads were about pet waste, service vendors, and a minor argument about solar panels. Nothing about the party, but then I found it. A single post by Loretta, time-stamped 1 hour before the 911 call. Several units may have noticed elevated activity near the Trask property. Out of an abundance of caution, I've notified the HOA Safety Committee and contacted appropriate city channels for reassurance. She was laying the groundwork before anything even happened. The party hadn't triggered her. It was part of her plan. The next morning, I sent Sergeant Kidd a link to the post and a time-stamped image of the gate entries. She responded within 10 minutes. Thanks, this helps. I'm moving it to internal misconduct review. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Because now, Loretta's fingerprints were on more than just a call. They were on a timeline. One I was going to dismantle, piece by piece. Emery Vance was the only person who didn't clap when Loretta Glynn took the stage at the emergency HOA session that Thursday evening. The others smiled, nodded, one or two even stood, but Emery stayed seated, fingers laced, back straight, eyes locked on the floor. You could miss it if you weren't watching, but I was. Loretta stood tall behind the podium, set up in the community hall, flanked by her usual guard, 2 committee members, a laptop, and a color-coded agenda packet stacked like a legal weapon. Her voice carried with that tight, smug poise she always reserved for damage control. As your elected HOA president, she said, it's my duty to ensure Redcrest Bluff remains safe, serene, and properly governed. In light of recent unauthorized activities, we'll be reviewing Section 14 of our event protocols. Not one mention of the birthday, not a word about Hollis. Just unauthorized activities. She spun it like a security issue, then leaned into her own version of events. I received multiple concerns, she went on, regarding unfamiliar vehicles, individuals in official-looking attire, and a possible misrepresentation of community intent. We responded in line with our protective bylaws. She didn't flinch as she said it, didn't blink. And as her voice filled the room, I scanned the semicircle of seated board members. That's when I caught Emery glance sideways. Just once. Not at me, not at the audience, but toward Loretta. And it wasn't the look of support. It was the look of someone who knew exactly what had happened, but wasn't ready to say it out loud. I didn't know much about Emery, only what little floated through the resident channels. Former youth counselor, widowed last year, took on the secretary position after the last guy stepped down, citing excessive internal pressure. She rarely spoke at meetings, always took notes, voted quietly, and tonight she hadn't touched her pen once. Before we close, Loretta said, I'd like to propose a motion to amend Section 14. Any event involving individuals in law enforcement, military, or security roles must be cleared through the HOA board with 14 days' notice. Someone actually clapped. I stood. Question, I said calmly. Loretta smiled without teeth. This isn't a Q&A portion, Mr. Trask. I'm not asking a question, I replied. I'm making a clarification. That amendment violates multiple residential assembly protections under the state HOA Act, and considering the event in question was held on my own property during permitted hours, with no noise violations or complaints on record, I'd suggest this isn't governance, it's retribution. The room went quiet. Loretta's smile flickered, but she held it. The board will review your comment as part of our internal minutes. That was her trick. File, rephrase, bury. I looked once more toward Emery, still seated, still silent, but now she was staring directly at Loretta, her lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. After the meeting, as residents trickled out and Loretta basked in the polite cluster of supporters near the punch table, I stepped toward the back of the hall to retrieve a document I'd dropped. I didn't need the paper. I needed the moment. Emery was walking slowly toward the exit, alone. Mrs. Vance? I said carefully. She turned, eyes cautious but not cold. I know you didn't vote for that clause, I said, and I know you didn't call anyone that night. Her face gave nothing away at first, but her hands, one gripped the strap of her bag so tightly the knuckles went white. She's not going to stop, you know, I continued. Not until every person who doesn't fit her image of this place is documented, flagged, or driven out. Emery looked down, then stepped a little closer, so quiet I could barely hear her. She told us the call was pre-cleared, that she had board approval. I didn't know until later. And the emergency drone redirect? She blinked. That one surprised her. She said that was a temporary override, safety protocol. I shook my head. It wasn't temporary, and it wasn't protocol. Emery didn't answer, but as she turned to leave, she whispered one thing. I'll call you soon. Not loud, not sure, but enough. Enough to know the silence was cracking. 3 days later, the drone returned. It hovered lower this time, just over the garden wall, whirring gently like a fly that wouldn't land. I stood on the back patio with a mug of coffee in my hand, eyes locked on the rotating lens. It wasn't making a patrol pass. It was idle, focused, watching. I placed the mug down, reached for my phone, and opened the neighborhood's public drone access dashboard. A transparency measure, Loretta had called it last year when she pushed for the drone security vote. Residents have a right to see where our protections are focused. Sure, Loretta, and I had a right to see the lie. The screen showed the drone's location flagged as sector drift, which meant it had been manually reassigned from its normal route to a temporary hotspot zone. But I hadn't triggered that. No alerts, no complaints filed, no motion trips. It had been manually overridden again. That made 4 separate override pings in less than 10 days, and all 4 had been logged over my property. I didn't wait. I called Sergeant Kit and left a message. New drone activity, not explained by board logs. It's back. Same unit. I hung up and opened the HOA site again, searching the most recent board updates. There it was, buried in a newsletter under Security Notes. Certain residential zones will be temporarily prioritized based on behavioral patterns observed during recent events. No specifics, no names, but the message was clear. Red Crest Bluff had a new classification system, one where my daughter and I had been recoded as behavioral patterns. That evening, Hollis stood by the window, arms crossed over her hoodie, watching the backyard as if it might lunge at her. "Why is it back?" she asked quietly. "Because some people mistake silence for surrender," I said. "They think if they shame you hard enough, you'll disappear." She didn't say anything, just kept looking outside, eyes sharp with something halfway between fear and fury. The next morning, I took the long way to work, through the upper trail behind the community clubhouse, where you could see the grid towers nestled into the hills. Redcrest Bluff prided itself on self-reliance. That included their private communication node, installed for emergencies, power outages, and drone signal control. And because I had helped configure those towers as part of a county contract 6 years ago, I knew exactly how the override system worked. Each signal path had a backup ping log, a trace signal that echoed back to the tower even after a manual redirect was applied. Most people didn't know about it. Loretta certainly didn't. I ran a proximity check from my field tablet. There it was, last night's override at 7:02 p.m. Signal origin, HOA secure kiosk terminal. She wasn't even using her home system anymore. She was sending overrides directly from the association access shed. No approval logs, no co-signatures, just raw control. I logged the metadata: location, time, signal bounce path, and authentication ID. I didn't have full access to the encrypted override key, but I didn't need it. The logs alone showed usage violation. More importantly, they showed targeting. When I got home that evening, there was another bulletin taped to the mailbox. It wasn't from the HOA. Someone, anonymous, had slipped it between the official notices. It read, "There's a list. You're on it. So am I. Next board meeting, she's pushing new enforcement zones." Below that, no name. Just a photocopied fragment of what looked like a draft resolution. Zone red, properties requiring enhanced surveillance due to repeat concern triggers. Concern triggers. That was the term she used. As if neighbors were motion sensors, as if laughter, uniforms, or grief were programmable faults. Later that night, I heard a knock. I opened the door to find Emery Vance, hood up, eyes wide. "She's planning to pass the zone classifications next week," she said quickly. "Wants to bake them into the new charter so she doesn't need a vote every time." I stepped aside to let her in, but she didn't move. "She's assigning them quietly now," Emery whispered. "Using behavior scores. Things like who attends meetings, who asks questions, who hosts guests after 9 p.m. It's all getting logged." "And the override access?" Emery nodded once. "Only she has the kiosk code." That was it. She'd crossed from manipulative into systemic abuse. She wasn't just watching us anymore. She was building a control system and calling it order. Friday night, I waited until just past 11. Hollis had gone to sleep early, earbuds in, her bedroom light flicking shadows against the wall. I sat in the garage, not doing anything in particular, just listening to the hum of the security system and the occasional shift of wind outside. The drone didn't come back that night, but I didn't need it to. I wasn't chasing a drone anymore. I was chasing a pattern. I powered on my terminal and connected to the municipal maintenance network, legally within bounds. My subcontractor credentials gave me access to open-source metadata across district systems. Not the contents of calls, not private identities, but timestamps, routing numbers, signal origin codes. What I needed wasn't hidden. It had just never been connected before. I narrowed the scope to the Redcrest Bluff HOA landline, an administrative number tied to their official incident reporting system. Then, I filtered every 911 call or non-emergency police request originating from that number over the last 18 months. 14 calls, all routed through the HOA's main line, all referencing vague disturbances. No assaults, no thefts, no accidents, just concerns. I opened each call's metadata packet, timestamps, duration, type of complaint. Then I cross-referenced them with the HOA's public incident bulletins, and the patterns snapped together like dry twigs. March. A resident hosted a backyard book club for women over 60. Loretta labeled it unauthorized assembly. June. A neighbor's adult son practiced violin on the patio. Loretta called for sound-based behavioral monitoring. August. A family hosted a retirement barbecue for a retiring paramedic. Uniforms again. Loretta called it optics overload. All incidents, all logged, all spun into policy afterward. Each one followed the same rhythm. Loretta claimed she received multiple complaints, filed an HOA notice, then quietly introduced new policy language to tighten restrictions. The police had never filed follow-ups. Most calls weren't even classified as actionable, but they still left a mark on the neighborhood's internal records, on the people involved. I added the latest, Hollis's Suite 16, time-stamped 911 report at 6:41 p.m., drone override at 6:39 p.m., Loretta's HOA Slack message at 5:51 p.m. stating she had alerted channels preemptively. The preemptive part, that was the dagger, because it proved intent. She hadn't responded to chaos. She anticipated it, shaped it, and logged it before it existed. She didn't just abuse emergency services. She manufactured justifications to normalize it. And those logs, the open call records, timestamps, cross-matched bulletin data, told the story without me ever needing to say a word. I bundled the files into a secure folder, encrypted it, and named it Red Crest Misuse Pattern, Series A. Then I created a short version, summarized, visualized, just 4 pages, timelines, charts, log references, a clean PDF, something anyone with a badge or an ounce of authority could understand at a glance. At the top, I added one line, consistent emergency misuse through non-incident HOA calls tied to policy shifts and surveillance expansion. That was all I needed to begin. Before I closed my terminal, I checked one more thing. The drone override logs. I didn't have Loretta's credentials, but I didn't need them to confirm a trace signal. Every manual override from the HOA kiosk sent a ping back to the primary grid node, and each ping left a signature based on which of the 5 secure IDs accessed the override system. 4 of them hadn't been used in months, only 1 had. I noted the ID string. It didn't give me a name, but it tied every override to a single source. Loretta was the only one with active access since June. I sat back in my chair, letting the quiet settle. It wasn't satisfaction. Not yet. Just confirmation that I wasn't crazy. That the system I helped build was now being twisted by someone who wore policy like armor while hiding the blade in her smile. That night, I placed the 4-page file in an envelope and addressed it to the County Emergency Dispatch Oversight Committee. No return name. No signature. Just a truth I was finally ready to let breathe. By Sunday morning, Hollis wouldn't step into the backyard, not even to get the package she'd been waiting for, a replacement lens for the old camera her mom used to carry in her cruiser. It had finally arrived. I saw her standing at the back door, arms folded, eyes flicking between the package and the sky, like she was waiting to see that silent black drone reappear. It didn't. But the memory of it was enough. She didn't ask questions anymore. She didn't challenge it. And that scared me more than if she'd yelled. I walked out, grabbed the box, and placed it on the kitchen counter without a word. That was the moment I knew this wasn't about HOA violations anymore. This was about fear, systematic, targeted, institutional fear, and I was done reacting to it. I called Emery Vance that afternoon. She didn't pick up, but she texted within minutes. I'll walk over tonight, 8 p.m. Can't talk long. I spent the rest of the day gathering everything. Printouts, timestamp logs, a fresh copy of the file I'd sent to dispatch oversight. Not to convince Emery, but to prepare for what came next. When she arrived, she didn't even step inside, just stood beneath the porch light, arms crossed, coat zipped too high for the warm air. "I've only got 5 minutes," she said. "I only need 2. I handed her a folder. She didn't open it yet. "That's not from me," I said. "That's a digital trail, one she left behind." "I can't testify," she said flatly. "I'm not asking you to." She looked at the folder like it might bite her. "I'm still part of the board, technically. If she finds out She already knows you've hesitated. That's why she's trying to push the vote through faster." Emery flinched at that. Her shoulders tensed. "She wants to hardwire surveillance zones into the charter, Emery. Not just guidelines. Charter-level policy. That's permanent architecture." "I know," she whispered. "She's 1 vote away. And that vote's not hers." That time, she met my eyes. She told me it was temporary, that it would calm the neighborhood after the incident. "You mean my daughter's birthday party?" Her jaw tightened. "She's monitoring property movement, behavior tracking." I pulled the code signatures on the drone logs. It's not just enforcement anymore, it's profiling. "She'll say it's security." "She's calling silence agreement. That's not security. That's a vacuum." Emery looked down at the folder again. Her hands were shaking now. "I used to believe her," she said finally. "When my husband passed, she was the first one to show up, brought dinner, covered my dues for a month, told me I should feel safe here. Safe doesn't mean quiet. It doesn't mean invisible. And it sure as hell doesn't mean uninvited when your wife dies in uniform and your kid wants to feel like the world still honors her." Her eyes welled up, but she blinked fast, hard. "I can't go against her directly, but I can stall the vote, maybe buy you 3 days. That's all I need." She pulled the folder tight to her chest and stepped off the porch. "Callan," she said, pausing halfway down the walk. What are you going to do? I didn't answer right away. I looked past her, at the faint outline of the drone tower glowing blue against the clouds. Remind the people watching who built the system they're abusing. She didn't say another word, just nodded once and disappeared into the night. Inside, Hollis sat on the couch, knees tucked under her, camera box unopened beside her. Who was that? She asked. Someone who used to be scared too. She didn't look away from the TV, but her hand moved, opened the box, slowly, like it might vanish if she tried too hard. You ever going to take that picture? I asked. She nodded, small, silent. Just not here, she said. And I knew exactly what she meant. It wasn't about the backyard anymore. It was about reclaiming space, not just hers, ours. Monday morning started with a knock, not a drone. I opened the door, expecting another bulletin, maybe a veiled warning from the committee. But it was Emery. This time, she wasn't hiding behind her coat or looking over her shoulder. She had a flash drive in her hand and a look in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Loretta made a mistake, she said. She printed the draft resolution too early. I stepped aside without a word and led her to the kitchen table. She slid the drive across like it was made of glass. She uploaded the full surveillance classification memo to our shared board folder, Emery continued. She thinks I didn't see it because I haven't voted yet, but it's time-stamped. She drafted it before the meeting, where she claimed the incident required a new security tier. She wrote the justification before the vote, and cited the birthday party as a catalyst, by name. Your name, Hollis's too. I stared at the drive. My hands didn't move. She's not just listing zones anymore, Emery added. She's assigning risk scores, behavioral indicators. She's building a profile matrix, guests per week, car count variants, even flagged deliveries after 8 p.m. God, I muttered, she's data washing. She's pretending it's pattern detection, but it's targeting. I finally picked up the drive, heart pounding. There's more, Emery said, softer now. The meeting she's planning tomorrow? It's a ratification vote. No open resident discussion. Just a simple board majority. If it passes, it becomes part of the charter. She's locking it in. She already has 2 votes. The treasurer's on the fence, and I haven't committed. You said you'd stall. She nodded. This is the stall. I opened my laptop and plugged in the drive. Inside was a single PDF, Redcrest Bluff Tiered Risk Management Charter Revision, Draft 3.2. The document was 18 pages long. I read every word. It was worse than she'd let on. Every section dripped with neutral language crafted to sound lawful. Resident activity clustering, surveillance optimization, law enforcement visibility deterrence. But underneath, it was clear. Loretta was trying to codify fear, and she was using Hollis as her test case. Page 7. Example, Zone Red Trigger. Unapproved, uniformed gathering of more than 4 individuals within non-board cleared window. Page 9. Suggested HOA action. Deploy drone surveillance. Initiate HOA-controlled contact with local enforcement. Flag property for behavioral review. I leaned back in my chair, blood burning in my ears. She's trying to give the board the power to preemptively treat residents as threats, I said. No violations, no due process, just optics. Emery didn't respond. I need the bylaws, I added. The official charter, not the public version. The original incorporation and amendments. She paused. If I give you those, I won't release your name. You'll be safe. She shook her head. I don't care about that anymore. I care about what happens if this thing passes. I'll need timestamps, edit histories, version logs. They're on the shared server. I'll download them tonight. You'll be seen. Then I'll be seen, she said. Let her come for me. I buried a husband last year. I'm not burying my spine, too. She stood, wiped her hands on her jeans. There's one more thing, she said. The treasurer, Martin, he's only voting yes because she told him the footage from your party showed escalating tension. He hasn't seen the actual clips. I've got gate entries and time-matched visual stills. Then show him. She left without another word, and I opened a new folder, titled it RBL Charter Violation Proof. One by one, I pulled everything I had into it. Call logs, drone signatures, HOA memos, entry timestamps, the annotated PDF. I layered the evidence until the framework was airtight. By nightfall, I'd finished the pitch deck, not for court, for confrontation. And I wasn't alone anymore. I met Martin Dreves the next morning at the Crestwalk Cafe, 3 blocks from the neighborhood gate. Neutral ground. Public enough to keep Loretta's loyalists from circling, quiet enough that a man could change his mind without losing face. He was already seated by the window when I arrived, fiddling with a sugar packet. His polo was tucked too tight, and his eyes didn't lift when I sat down. "I'm not here to argue," I said, placing the manila envelope gently on the table. "I'm here because you've been misled." He sighed like he'd been holding something heavy for weeks. "She said it was for protection," he muttered. "Just standard risk mapping, for insurance even." "Open it." He hesitated, then slid the packet open with a finger. Inside were 6 printed stills from the HOA's own public-facing gate camera system, each one time-stamped, each showing off-duty officers arriving with wrapped presents, soft drinks, and laughter in the background. No weapons, no visible tension, no crowds. Below that, a page of signal logs, emergency override pings, all routed from the HOA kiosk, all triggered within minutes of the 911 call. "Drone was retargeted before any complaint was filed," I said. "Gate footage shows 0 incident. Sergeant Elena Kitt already filed a notice of misuse." He stared at the evidence, jaw clenching. "And the charter?" I asked. "Did you actually read the language she submitted, or just the summary she handed out?" "She said it was technical formatting, that the structure was legally required." I handed him a second document, the page from Emery's flash drive, the one that included the words "unapproved uniformed gathering" and "behavioral concern scoring." He read it twice. I could tell the moment it clicked. "She's naming people as threats. Not directly, but you see the trick. The triggers are designed to retroactively justify surveillance. If it passes, anyone who challenges her becomes a pattern match. She told me this was about reducing liability. This is the liability." He pushed the documents back toward me, slower this time. "I should have asked to see it all," he murmured. I didn't want to start a fight. Then help end one." He looked around the cafe like he was suddenly afraid someone had followed him. "If I reverse my vote, you're voting against an unlawful charter revision. That's your job." He didn't answer, but he didn't argue either. His silence felt heavier than his words. "Board meets tonight?" I asked. 7 sharp. "I'll be there." He nodded once, then stood, still holding the trigger document. I didn't need him to promise anything. I just needed him to look Loretta in the eyes and not flinch. By late afternoon, I had the rest of my plan in motion. I connected my terminal at home and opened the secured oversight portal used by the County Emergency Services Ethics Board. My earlier file, Series A, had already been reviewed. A preliminary case flag had been issued. But now, I added the flash drive materials from Emory and a new subfolder titled Board-Level Intent Evidence. I attached a simple message. Previously submitted patterns now confirmed by unreleased HOA charter drafts, internal Slack logs, and direct override abuse. Behavior classification targeting private residents via non-lawful surveillance escalation. Requesting formal intervention process initiation. I encrypted and submitted the package at 5:42 p.m. Then I printed 3 hard copies, one for the board, one for Martin, and one for public record. At 6:10 p.m., I opened my garage and stood in the middle of the space where Hollis's birthday lights still hung limp and forgotten. I hadn't taken them down. Some part of me refused to. This space, our space, had been marked as a threat, but tonight, the labeling would stop. I turned off the light, walked back inside, and grabbed my badge-labeled manila folder, the one I'd saved for last, the one that bore a photo of the badge cake, still whole, still untouched. Underneath, the caption I'd added in small black font. "My daughter's grief isn't a pattern, it's a memory, and I won't let you write it off." By the time I arrived at the HOA building, the sun had dipped low enough to cast the glass facade in amber streaks. Redcrest Bluff always dressed up nice when it wanted to look respectable. But tonight wasn't about appearance. I stepped through the doors carrying a single folder and a flash drive, dressed plain. No suit, no badge. Just me. The boardroom was already half full. Residents lined the perimeter chairs, murmuring low. Some glanced at me, unsure of what side I stood on. A few nodded. Most avoided eye contact. At the front, the board sat in their designated seats. Loretta Glynn, as always, occupied center stage. Hands clasped, posture perfect, smile rehearsed. Emory sat to her right, expression unreadable. Martin Dreves sat on the left end, flipping slowly through the printout I'd handed him that morning. He didn't look up. Loretta tapped her gavel once. We'll begin. The standard motions moved quickly. Approval of minutes, landscaping contractor renewals, the usual fluff designed to lull people into a false rhythm. Then she shifted. Item 7, she announced. Proposal for Charter Amendment 5C, Surveillance Zone Implementation and Risk Pattern Analysis. She turned slightly toward the crowd. This amendment is designed to streamline our community's safety protocols by integrating behavior-mapped indicators into our surveillance system, allowing for more efficient identification of potential risks. Not residents, not families. Risks. I stood before she could keep spinning. Before you vote, I said, voice steady, there's evidence the board must review. Loretta didn't flinch. Mr. Trask, this is not a public comment session. I'm not commenting, I said, placing the folder on the table. I'm presenting material evidence of premeditated misuse of HOA emergency authority, as well as intent to classify residents based on arbitrary pattern data designed to suppress legal community activity. Murmurs erupted behind me. Loretta's voice tightened. If you refuse to yield, you'll be escorted. Emery didn't move. Neither did Martin. I placed the flash drive beside the folder. Everything's time-stamped, includes drone override metadata, emergency call log overlays, and internal documents obtained from your own shared board server. You accessed private files? Files submitted by a board member with standing, I said, eyes still on Loretta. Files that show you authored the behavioral risk matrix before any of the incidents you used to justify it. Now her smile cracked. Martin cleared his throat. Loud. Firm. I motion to pause the vote, he said. Loretta turned sharply. This is irregular. I motion, Martin repeated, and I want the board to review these materials before we move forward. Silence. Emery seconded the motion. The vote paused. Residents began shifting in their seats, whispering, catching up in real time. Some were already pulling out phones, snapping pictures of the flash drive and folder. Others leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. Loretta stared at me like I'd broken a sacred rule. I held her gaze. You pushed surveillance on grieving families, I said low enough that only she could hear. You flagged a teenage girl's birthday party as paramilitary behavior. She didn't answer. Her jaw flexed once, then stilled. I stepped back as Martin opened the folder and scanned the first pages. The images were unignorable. Uniformed officers entering with no sign of disturbance, time synced with the override logs. The Slack message Loretta had posted hours before the party, pre-blaming external presences, and the draft resolution naming the Trask property as a case study. 10 minutes passed. 15. Then Martin looked up. This vote doesn't go forward tonight, he said. Not with this in front of us. Loretta started to object, but he held up the photo from the last page. The cake, the badge, and Hollis's name piped in white icing. You called this a threat, he said, not loud, but firm. I won't attach my name to that. He turned to Emery. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to, because the next moment, 2 more board members folded their hands and nodded in agreement. Loretta sat frozen, not outvoted, outmaneuvered, because this wasn't her stage anymore. It was evidence, and the room could see it. Loretta didn't speak for the rest of the meeting, not even when residents began raising their hands, one after another, asking questions she could no longer dodge. What behavioral profiling meant, why she had flagged people by delivery frequency, whether the drone's changes had ever been disclosed to the insurance committee. She just sat there, lips tight, eyes flicking from face to face like she was suddenly seeing strangers. Because that's what we were to her now, unpredictable. And for someone like Loretta, unpredictability was the one thing she couldn't control. The board adjourned with no vote, officially tabled pending legal review of resident-submitted materials. Loretta didn't look at me as she gathered her laptop and binder. But Emery did, just once. Not a smile, just a nod. Small. Final. I stepped out into the night air before the others. The building's exterior lights buzzed slightly, a hum that filled the silence left behind. My car was parked at the far end of the lot, and I took my time walking to it, letting the adrenaline settle. Halfway there, I heard the door open behind me, shoes on pavement. Loretta, she didn't call my name, just kept walking until she matched my pace, heels clicking faster than mine. You made this personal, she said without looking at me. You used my daughter's name in a risk memo. She stopped, jaw clenched. You brought emotion into something meant to protect this community. I brought facts. You brought a surveillance system wrapped in a lie. You think this is over because you embarrassed me in a room full of fence watchers? No, I said. It's over because the system caught your reflection and didn't like what it saw. She scoffed. You think the county will care? HOA authority is protected under civil governance. Pattern classification isn't illegal. No, but misusing emergency channels is. So is targeting residents based on personal bias while manipulating board consent. And the drone override logs? They speak louder than you ever could. For a second, just one, something in her eyes flinched. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was calculation failing to keep up. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then turned and walked toward her car without another word. I let her go. There was nothing left to say to someone who built an empire of silence and forgot that even silence leaves fingerprints. When I got home, Hollis was on the back porch with her camera for the first time in weeks. The lens glinted faintly in the low light, her shoulders hunched, eyes squinting at the screen. She didn't look up as I walked around the side of the house, but I knew she knew I was there. Did it pass? She asked, still staring through the viewfinder. No, I said, not even close. She clicked the shutter once, the quiet snap of finality. I got a picture of the drone tower. I raised an eyebrow. You're starting with infrastructure? She shrugged. It's where the fear comes from. I want to see what it looks like without it watching. I didn't say anything, just sat beside her on the steps, letting the moment breathe. After a while, she leaned her head on my shoulder. I don't want to be someone people are afraid to live near, she whispered. You're not. I feel like I am. You're someone who made them realize what fear feels like, and what it costs. She nodded, just once. Good. The next morning, I got a call from Sergeant Kit. The Oversight Committee had officially opened a preliminary investigation into emergency service misuse by a private neighborhood board. She didn't say Loretta's name. She didn't have to. By noon, the HOA's legal counsel had released a statement pausing all surveillance enforcement initiatives and promising a third-party policy review. Loretta's name wasn't on that either. But the drone? It never flew again. The tower light blinked red for 3 days before the HOA quietly powered it down. Redcrest Bluff didn't hold another emergency meeting that month. And the badge cake? We cut it 2 nights later. Not for the party, for the healing. The next board meeting wasn't called by Loretta. It was called by the residents. Flyers went up on every mailbox. Not the usual template with the HOA's royal blue border, but plain white paper printed in home offices and taped up by hand. At the top, bold text, Community Town Hall, speak, listen, reclaim. No logos, no leaders, just time, place, and a simple promise. No microphones would be turned off. It was held at the Rec Center Gymnasium, the only space big enough to fit the turnout. By the time I arrived, the front row was already packed. Parents with toddlers, retirees in polo shirts, teens with crossed arms and earbuds still dangling. Loretta was there too, off to the side, seated in the second row behind the treasurer's table. No binder this time, no clipboard, just a thin stack of papers in her lap, untouched. At the front, Martin stood behind a folding table, cleared of decor. He didn't need a gavel, just held up a hand for quiet, and surprisingly, it worked. We're not here to argue, he began. We're here to correct. He didn't look at Loretta when he said it. He didn't have to. One by one, residents stepped forward, not to shout, not to accuse, just to name things. A teacher from Ash Hollow Lane spoke about the time she got a warning letter for hosting a small summer tutoring group on her porch. A nurse from Birch Hill talked about being flagged for having her brother, a sheriff's deputy, park his marked cruiser in the guest lot overnight after a double shift. A widow recounted the week her lights were monitored after having out-of-state family stay during a funeral. None of it was illegal, none of it dangerous. All of it had been entered into concern logs. I stood when the silence stretched long between 2 voices. I'm not here to relive what happened, I said. You already know. The facts are on paper. The abuse is cataloged. I paused, then placed a single sheet on the table. It wasn't a report. It was a photo. The badge cake. My daughter planned a party to honor her mother's badge number. Not a protest, not a rally, a birthday, and she spent it hiding in the hallway because someone decided it didn't fit the neighborhood's aesthetic. I heard someone shift in their chair, but no one interrupted. This is what happens, I said, when enforcement loses its memory. When power is handed to people who don't know the stories behind the porches, they police. Martin stepped forward and picked up the photo, held it up for the room to see. "I move," he said, voice quiet but firm, "to call a vote for the immediate removal of Loretta Glynn from all positions of HOA leadership." The silence that followed wasn't stunned. It was waiting. Loretta stood then, slowly, deliberately. "I have given 12 years to this board," she said. "I've kept this community safe, clean, desirable, and now I'm being ousted because one man couldn't follow a protocol." "No," Emery said, rising before she could finish. "You're being ousted because you stopped listening." Emery didn't raise her voice. She didn't point. She simply placed a second flash drive on the table. "The board has reviewed the override logs, the metadata, the Slack archives. We have verified every one of Callan's timestamps. Every override came from your terminal. You lied to the board, and you lied to us." A murmur passed through the room like a shift in air pressure. Not outrage, relief. Martin lifted his hand again. All those in favor of removal? Hands shot up. Dozens, then dozens more. Mine was one of the last, but it stayed there, still, unshaken. Loretta didn't protest. She just sat down again, like someone quietly accepting a verdict they still didn't believe was real. When the hands lowered, Martin cleared his throat. "Effective immediately, the board will transition to interim leadership pending a full resident vote. All surveillance protocols are suspended, and any resident who received a concern letter over the past 6 months is invited to a full review and reversal process." The applause didn't erupt. It rose, like something that had been holding its breath for too long. Hollis wasn't there that night, but when I got home, she was waiting on the porch swing. "I saw it live," she said, holding up her phone. "Didn't know we were live streaming." "We weren't," she said, smirking faintly. "I set it up last week, just in case." And for the first time in months, she laughed. The drone tower came down on a Thursday. No announcement, no warning, just a low rumble and the clank of steel as contractors dismantled the skeletal frame that had once loomed over the south end of Redcrest Bluff. Some residents watched from their porches. Others clapped. A few just shook their heads, quietly ashamed it had taken this long. I didn't go to watch. I stayed on the porch with Hollis, her camera balanced in her lap, a fresh memory card waiting to be filled. She had waited for this moment, not to celebrate, but to document. And she didn't take a single photo until the tower's last beam hit the grass. Then she clicked the shutter. Once. That was all she needed. "They're going to vote next month," she said. "New board. Whole reset." "They'll need candidates," I replied. She looked at me sideways. "Not you." "Definitely not me." She smiled, then handed me the picture she'd printed the night before. The one from the porch, the one with me standing by the gate under the drone's shadow, fists in my pockets, jaw tight, unaware she'd even taken it. "You look like someone who wins slow," she said. "But completely." I didn't answer. There was nothing to add. Loretta had disappeared almost overnight. No appeals, no messages. Her property went dark, windows shuttered, mailbox empty. Last we heard, she was transferring her stake in the HOA charter to a silent proxy, likely preparing to move. No one asked where. No one went to say goodbye. Redcrest Bluff didn't need closure. It needed oxygen. The new interim board passed a motion to purge all resident concern logs and sunset the behavioral monitoring clause. They issued formal apologies to every household listed in the override registry. Emery Vance, now acting president, personally hand-delivered our letter. It came with a printed copy of the board's statement. "Surveillance is not community. Trust cannot be built through control, and no child's grief should ever be made to feel like a threat." Hollis framed it beside the photo of her mom's badge. A week later, she used that same frame to hang her first gallery submission at school, a series titled Spaces Reclaimed. The first image? The badge cake, taken from above, soft light cutting through frosting, badge number gleaming in gold. It wasn't about the party anymore, or even the night Loretta called 911. It was about who got to define what safety looked like, and who didn't, because control isn't safety, and silence isn't peace. That night, we cut a second cake, just the two of us. No guests, no cameras, just a quiet celebration for something that didn't need to be filmed to matter. Hollis lit one candle, 16 plus 1, just for the year we got back, she said, and we let it burn down until the wax melted into the plate. Some victories don't look like courtroom rulings or overturned laws. Some look like a drone tower gone, a boardroom emptied, a kid laughing again without checking the sky. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.